The thought process tells me they have no idea what's going on. I am baffled by how dumb these players are. I'm just keeping it real.
Midnight wasn't just a time on the clock. It was a line in the sand. When the deadline hit, there was no handshake, no breakthrough, no quiet deal behind closed doors, just silence followed by shock. And in that moment, the WNBA didn't just miss a negotiation window, it stepped into the most dangerous standoff the league has faced in years. Most fans didn't even realize how serious this was at first. Social media kept scrolling, headlines kept spinning, but behind the scenes, ownership and the players' union officially walked away from the table with zero agreement in place. And then the comments started coming out. One quote in particular exploded across the internet and instantly
I saw this
became
comment,
the
just shook my
symbol of
head, and I
this
said, "You
entire
got to be
collapse."
kidding."
A line meant to
I
sound
just shook my
powerful,
head. I couldn't
but
believe it.
instead revealed
So
a much
now,
deeper problem that nobody wanted to address.
Nafisia Collier
Because
and
this
Nneka Ogwumike are
isn't
now
just about
channeling
money.
Caitlin Clark.
It's about timing. The WNBA is sitting on the biggest wave of attention it's ever had. Packed arenas, rising TV ratings, new fans showing up in record numbers. Momentum that took decades to build finally arrived. And now it's being put at risk. What makes this even crazier is that not everyone inside the league agrees with how this is being handled. Some players see the danger. Some voices are calling for patience.
Eventually a line was going to be drawn. Eventually a line would be drawn.
With the season itself.
Considering what's already
That
come out,
divide
there's
is
no
growing.
telling how many dumb things.
And it's starting to leak into public view. Because once you break down what's actually being demanded, how the numbers really work, and who actually holds leverage in this fight, the story becomes very different from what's being pushed in headlines. This isn't a simple labor dispute anymore. It's a fork in the road. One direction protects growth and stability. The other risks shutting everything down just as the spotlight finally turned on. And the decision being made right now could define the future of this league for the next decade. What made this collapse hit harder than anyone expected wasn't just that talks failed. It was how they failed. There was no gradual slowdown, no "we'll revisit this next week," no soft landing. According to reports, both sides walked away with zero common ground left on the table. The window officially closed, and when it did, the tone changed immediately. Ownership wasn't talking about compromise anymore. The players' union wasn't signaling flexibility either. Instead, what followed felt more like two sides bracing for impact than working toward resolution. Sources close to the process described the final hours as tense. Proposals went back and forth, numbers didn't line up, timelines didn't match, and eventually patience ran out. That's when the messaging started splitting. Union leadership framed the situation as the league refusing to see player wins and league wins as the same thing. Ownership countered privately by pointing at basic math, rising costs, operational losses, and the reality of running a league that still hasn't reached consistent profitability. That gap matters, because once negotiations stop being about shared growth and start becoming about who's right, compromise becomes almost impossible. And that's exactly what happened here. Instead of bridging the divide, both sides dug in deeper. The league prepared contingency plans. The union leaned into public messaging. And suddenly, a business discussion turned into a public standoff. But what truly lit the fire under this situation wasn't the closed-door meetings. It was one sentence, one comment that instantly went viral and shifted public reaction from curiosity to controversy. This is the moment the entire conversation went sideways. During a national interview, one line was dropped that instantly took over social media. It sounded sharp, it sounded bold, it was designed to land like a mic drop moment. But instead, it backfired. The comment compared owners claiming financial losses to saying your pockets are empty while holding the keys to a brand new Ferrari. On the surface, it played into a popular narrative, rich owners versus underpaid players. The problem? It ignored how the business actually works. Within minutes, clips of that quote were everywhere. Fans started debating it, analysts started dissecting it, and suddenly, the labor dispute wasn't about negotiations anymore, it was about perception. Because that one sentence revealed a massive disconnect. It framed personal wealth as proof that the league itself is profitable. It blurred the line between an owner's outside businesses and the actual finances of the WNBA. And to a lot of people watching, it made the union's position look emotional instead of strategic. That's when the backlash started building. Not just from ownership circles, but from business analysts, sponsors, and even longtime fans who understood that a billionaire owning other successful companies doesn't magically make one specific investment profitable. The Ferrari line became symbolic, not of power, but of misunderstanding. And once that happened, the narrative shifted fast. Because now people weren't just asking what players wanted. They were asking whether union leadership truly understood the financial foundation they were standing on. And that question opened the door to a much deeper issue. One that most casual viewers never think about. Where the money actually comes from. This is where the Ferrari argument completely falls apart. Because owning expensive cars, private jets, or luxury homes has nothing to do with whether the WNBA itself is profitable. Most team owners didn't build their wealth through women's basketball. They made it through other businesses. Some through the NFL, some through tech, some through real estate, some through global investments. The WNBA is just one piece of a much bigger financial portfolio. And here's the part that rarely gets talked about. For years, ownership groups have been covering operating losses to keep this league alive. That's not speculation. Reports have shown the WNBA has struggled to consistently turn profits. In some recent seasons, losses reportedly reached tens of millions of dollars. That means when owners write checks for salaries, travel, arenas, and marketing, a lot of that money isn't coming from ticket sales or TV deals. It's coming out of their own pockets. So when people point at personal wealth and say you can afford it, they're missing the real issue. A business doesn't survive on generosity. It survives on sustainable revenue. And that's why this conversation has gotten so tense. Because there's a huge difference between asking for a bigger share of profit and asking for money from a system that's still underwater. One is negotiation. The other is dependency. And once that distinction becomes clear, the stakes of this labor fight change dramatically. But the financial confusion doesn't stop there. Because the biggest disagreement isn't even about how much players get paid. It's about how that money would be calculated. And that difference could decide whether the league grows or collapses. This is the part most people gloss over, but it's the most important piece of the entire standoff. The current demand being discussed isn't just about revenue sharing. It's about gross revenue. And that difference is massive. Gross revenue is simply the money that comes in the door. Ticket sales, sponsorships, media deals, merchandise. It doesn't account for what it costs to actually run the league. Profit is what's left after expenses. And those expenses are heavy. Travel, hotels, arena rentals, marketing, insurance, staff salaries, coaches, medical teams, operations, production crews, office overhead, security, utilities, all of it adds up fast. So when players push for a percentage of gross revenue, what they're really saying is, pay us first and deal with the losses later. That model doesn't work long-term. Because if the league brings in, let's say, $10 million in revenue, but spends $50 million to operate, Giving away a guaranteed cut up front just deepens the hole. It forces owners to subsidize even more losses using money from outside businesses. And that's exactly what ownership is pushing back against. They're not arguing against paying players fairly. They're arguing against locking in a system that permanently keeps the league underwater. That's why this fight feels so intense. One side sees immediate compensation. The other sees long-term survival. And when those two visions clash, compromise becomes extremely difficult. But here, where the story takes another turn. Because while this financial debate is happening behind closed doors, one player has been quietly shifting the entire power dynamic of the league. Not through negotiations, not through sound bites, but through something much more important: momentum. While negotiations were stalling in boardrooms, something completely different was happening on the court. Fans were showing up. A lot of them. Attendance surged, TV ratings climbed, merchandise started moving faster than ever, and at the center of all that momentum sat one name that keeps changing the conversation: Caitlin Clark. Whether people like it or not, she became the engine driving the league's current surge. Casual fans tuned in just to watch her play, new viewers who never followed the WNBA before suddenly cared. Sponsors took notice, media attention exploded. And Clark understood exactly what that moment meant. In public comments, she didn't talk about pressure tactics or shutdown threats. She talked about timing, about protecting momentum, about making sure games are played so the league can keep growing while the spotlight is finally on. That's a very different approach. Instead of fighting over a bigger slice of the pie right now, she focused on making the pie bigger first. Because leverage in sports doesn't come from statements. It comes from viewers. It comes from sold-out arenas. It comes from TV contracts that actually reflect demand. Clark's mindset wasn't emotional. It was strategic. And that's why many observers believe she quietly pushed for restraint when the opt-out decision was made. Reports suggest not everyone inside the players' group was comfortable with the timing. Some voices wanted patience instead of confrontation. But those voices didn't win the room, which is where the internal tension starts showing. Because publicly, union leadership claims unity. Behind the scenes, the strategies don't appear fully aligned. And that disconnect is creating a dangerous situation. One where momentum could be sacrificed for short-term positioning. And once momentum is gone, it's incredibly hard to get back. Publicly, the message coming from union leadership has been clear. Unity, alignment, compromise. In interviews, leaders have repeatedly said they agree with the idea of protecting momentum and keeping the season alive. They've echoed phrases about finding common ground and working towards solutions. But when you slow down and actually listen to what's being said and compare it to what's being done, the gap becomes obvious. On one hand, they talk about flexibility. On the other hand, the core demand hasn't moved. The same revenue targets, the same pressure tactics, the same hardline stance that led to the deadline expiring in the first place. That contradiction is what's confusing fans. Because you can't publicly support playing the season while simultaneously holding positions that make a shutdown more likely, those two strategies don't operate in the same direction. Reports suggest there are different philosophies inside the players' group right now. Some voices want to ride the current wave of attention and let the new media deals mature. Others appear focused on maximizing immediate leverage while the spotlight is hot. And that internal tension is starting to leak into public view. You can hear it in the wording. Statements that sound cooperative, followed immediately by blame being shifted back to the league. Comments about reasonable demands without acknowledging how far apart the numbers still are. It creates mixed signals. To fans, it feels like progress is being promised without actual movement happening. To ownership, it looks like posturing instead of compromise. And that's dangerous in a negotiation like this. Because once both sides stop believing the other is acting in good faith, talks don't stall. They harden. And when positions harden, the next step usually isn't resolution. It's escalation. Which brings us to the biggest risk of all. What happens if neither side blinks? Because the consequences don't hit ownership first. They hit the league itself. And the players. If this standoff turns into a work stoppage, the damage won't just be financial. It'll be cultural. Because momentum in sports is fragile, you don't pause it and expect it to magically resume where it left off. When fans lose the habit of tuning in, when casual viewers move on to other leagues, when sponsors shift budgets elsewhere, that attention doesn't automatically come back. And right now, the WNBA is finally breaking through to mainstream audiences. That's what makes this moment so risky. A shutdown wouldn't just mean missed games, it would mean missed opportunities, lost TV windows, cancelled sponsorship activations, stalled merch sales, fewer storylines, less media coverage, less relevance. For ownership, that's painful but survivable. Most owners have diversified wealth and multiple revenue streams outside basketball. For players, it's different. No games means no game checks, no national exposure, no endorsement momentum, no highlight reels keeping their brands alive. For many athletes, this is their primary income window. A lost season isn't just a delay, it's a permanent hit to earning potential. And there's another layer most people ignore. A shutdown would give networks and sponsors an excuse to hesitate on future deals. When instability enters the picture, investment becomes cautious. Long-term contracts get smaller, risk premiums go up, growth slows. That affects everyone. Veterans, rookies, bench players, superstars. It even affects expansion plans. Because no league expands while facing labor chaos. And once expansion slows, roster spots shrink, opportunities disappear, careers get shorter. That's why this moment is bigger than negotiation tactics. It's about whether the WNBA protects the rare momentum it finally earned, or lets it slip away in the middle of a power struggle. Which brings us to the final question. Not what feels fair, not what sounds strong, but what actually works. This is the fork in the road. The WNBA is standing at a moment most leagues never get. Real attention, real curiosity, real momentum that didn't exist a few years ago. And now, the decisions being made behind closed doors will decide whether that momentum turns into something permanent or disappears just as fast as it arrived. One path is about patience and growth. Play the games, let the ratings settle, let the new fans turn into regular fans, let media deals mature into actual profit. Build a league that can stand on its own feet, not one that survives because someone wealthy keeps covering losses out of obligation. That's the long game. The other path is about immediate pressure. Demanding a large share of gross revenue before the business is stable, treating owner wealth as proof money exists, framing the league like a finished product instead of one still being built. That path feels powerful in the moment, but it carries serious risk. Because you can't negotiate with math. You can't force profit where it doesn't exist. And you can't shut down the product and expect the audience to wait patiently. That's the part Caitlin Clark seems to understand better than anyone else in this situation. Her message wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, it was simple: play the games, protect the moment, don't blow this opportunity. And that's why her voice matters. Because leverage in sports doesn't come from sound bites. It comes from fans in seats, eyes on screens, and dollars flowing consistently. Without that, every negotiation is built on sand. This isn't about tearing players down. Wanting fair pay is valid. Wanting respect is valid. But demanding money that hasn't been created yet and risking a shutdown to do it could undo years of progress in one move. The deadline passing wasn't symbolic. It was a warning. Now the question is whether anyone listens. So let me ask you straight. Are the players taking a necessary stand at the right time, or are they pushing too hard at the worst possible moment? Is Caitlin Clark right to focus on momentum over confrontation? And what happens to the league if this really goes dark? Drop your honest take in the comments. If you want real breakdowns without the media spin, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because this story isn't slowing down, and the next move could change everything. So now it all comes down to this. The WNBA is standing in the biggest spotlight it has ever had, and it's deciding whether to protect that moment or gamble it away. Momentum like this doesn't come twice. You either build on it or you lose it. This situation isn't about who sounds tougher in interviews. It's about who understands the reality of growth, timing, and leverage. Because shutting things down doesn't create power. Playing games does. Filling arenas does. Keeping fans invested does. That's why this debate matters more than any single contract. If the league goes dark, the attention disappears. The casual fans move on. Sponsors hesitate. Networks get cautious. And rebuilding that momentum could take years if it even comes back at all. And on the flip side, if cooler heads take over, if growth is protected first, and if the business actually stabilizes, then future negotiations suddenly happen from a position of strength instead of desperation. So here's the real question for you. Are the players making a smart stand at the right moment, or are they risking the league's biggest breakthrough? Is Caitlin Clark right to prioritize momentum over confrontation? And do you think this standoff helps the WNBA or quietly hurts it? Drop your honest opinion in the comments. If you want real breakdowns without media spin, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because this story isn't done, and the next move could reshape the entire league.